What I'm going to do today is kind of give you the whole shebang on B corporations and benefit corporations and a little bit of gears, and I'll explain what all of those things are. And we'll also go into a little bit more depth on the standards because that's something that Professor Flepp mentioned was of interest to you guys, so we can spend a little time in the portal exploring what that looks like. And also a little bit of time just making some clarifications around structural questions, which have also, she mentioned, come up, so we can just go over those two pieces in more detail. So first, to kind of set the stage on what the overall goal is of B-Lab and also of the companies and organizations that we work with, is really creating a new version of the economy. That we're building something that will create economic opportunity for all, that will be preserving the environment instead of taking advantage of the environment, that will alleviate poverty. You know, so we're pretty comfortable with the big audacious goal idea. But what we're facing right now and what companies have faced in this environment is that we have this trend that people want to support good companies, many companies want to do good with their business, investors want to do good with their dollars, but there's very few standards that are out there that enable people to be able to tell the difference between a good company and just good marketing. And the status quo is focused on short-term profits for shareholders, and companies in many cases are beholden to that in ways that make them make decisions that they might not otherwise make. And so the system wasn't built for the kind of economy that we are working towards. And so what B-Lab exists to do is to try to help build the infrastructure that will lead us to a better version of the economy. And that takes three forms. So the first initiative is around shining a light on entrepreneurs who are already doing good. And that's around building a community of certified B corporations. The second is around creating better public policy so companies don't have to have as much of a short-term focus on that return to shareholders and they have better flexibility. And the third is around getting investment into high-impact companies so that we can be really supporting their growth and making sure that we're making that change over to high-impact companies instead of high-impact return. So first question, what's a certified B corporation? I've already said that 8 times, you didn't know what it was. It's a company that's gone through a corporate certification. So this is a company level certification where they're meeting high standards for social and environmental performance, higher standards for transparency, and higher legal standards of accountability. And so for all companies, that process starts with going through the B impact assessment. And many companies are taking that B impact assessment even if they don't become certified B corporations in an effort to measure what matters and have a platform for them to at least have an understanding of what their impact is on all of their stakeholders. So the assessment is free, confidential, dynamic, and a fairly powerful tool. It's all online and it's all free to the users. And over 7,000 businesses have already gone through that assessment. Again, as a way to see what's out there, what they could be doing, and what tools are available to help them improve. The areas that the assessment covers are under workers, community, environment, and then social enterprise, or what we're actually moving towards the impact-focused business model. And I want to actually get out of the PowerPoint and show you what that looks like, because a lot of times that's very abstract. So this is a fake account because I actually can't share information with you about companies who take the assessment. But importantly, this account is for a company in the developed market with more than 250 employees in a manufacturing sector. And the assessment does change based on all of those areas. So developed versus emerging market, numbers of employees, and your sector. So we don't ask a small law firm the same questions that we ask of a large brewery, which is what this is here. So you can see that the sections here, we have all of these larger sections get kind of pulled down into smaller subsections and also into metrics. This connection's uninterrupted. That's fascinating. Oh, oh no, I thought I was already connected.
You can just type in XXX, ABC, sorry. And
ABC, all right.
just anything really.
They already had the bars, I don't know why. There we go. Right. Trust you, I'm very safe. Everything's confidential. No. You know, for instance, in workers, we're asking about compensation and benefits, and we can take a look at things like paying a living wage, the ratio of highest paid to lowest paid employees, what kind of, you know, who is participating in the bonus plan and how much. And then you kind of your standard benefits around healthcare, but also around whether or not part-time or flex-time employees can qualify for those benefits. Other pieces that companies might be providing for their workers. The community section is our broadest section, so that's looking at everything from your charitable giving to your community service, to your supply chain, to whether that supply chain has a preference for local, sustainable, women-owned, minority-owned suppliers, if you're working with those suppliers to improve their own performance. So there's a lot of pieces that go within that community section. And basically the point here, and so again, anybody is free to create an account and go in and see what all these questions are and how they change for the different types of assessments. The end result of an assessment is the B impact report, which a company can see at any time, can see how they're doing, can see which sections they still need to complete. And something that we've recently put in is you can actually see comparables. So you can see your points and the percentage of points that you got, as well as other sustainable businesses who have completed this version of the assessment. So those are the companies that have gone through it, and then how you compare to the community of B corporations, which we actually just implemented, and people have been pretty psyched about being able to see in real time how they're comparing to other folks in their industry and their size. There are a bunch of other tools that are available in the portal. So if companies say, if it's what we would call a mainstream company who's kind of exploring what all of this means and what is all of this green and community thing happening here, you can actually go to a section on Improve Your Score, which will create a customized improvement report that shows you where you've done well, what's the low-hanging fruit, the medium kind of goals, and the long-term goals that you could look for your company, as well as a bunch of tools and best practice guides that are available. So if you say you do want to start creating a community service program for your employees, there's somewhere to start for your company. You don't have to figure it out from scratch. Does that make sense on the assessment and how that works? It's a little bit of a taste. It's hard to get a full thing unless you go through the entire portal, but we're all good. I see some heads nodding, so I'll take that as a yes.
Just real quick, how long would the assessment last for a company? How long is that phase like?
Yep, so for smaller companies, it's between 1 and 2 hours to go through it. As the company becomes larger and more complex, they're gathering data from different sites. It can take a total of up to a week dedicated to actually getting that and putting into the system. We work with many of those larger companies to kind of handle that process of saying, great, we got this information from those suppliers and this information from these suppliers, and let's figure out what that means for this question. But it can be a little bit more of a process for a Patagonia versus, the Mug Shots coffee shop in Philadelphia. But for smaller companies, it's usually between 1 and 2 hours. And importantly, it's not like you have to go through the whole thing a shot. This is once you create an account, you can come back to it, your information is saved, you can note which questions you kind of estimated that you want to come back to for later, so you can kind of just get a breeze through to get an idea of where you are. So the tool is created to help you figure out where you are, and so you can do that quick estimation version and then come back and do the nitty-gritty pieces.
Does someone verify the information, and can you lose your certification?
Yes, and yes. So, there we go. So, That portal is available for any company at any time. If you want to become a certified B Corporation, then there's a verification process that you go through. And so for all companies, you're doing a phone call with a member of our standards team to go through the assessment, make sure that gives us a chance for us to ask questions that, maybe there's a weird combination of answers in a particular section and we get clarity on that. It's a time for the company to ask questions about, well, I answered this question yes because we have this thing, but I wasn't really sure. So there's a pretty deep human touch for all of these certification process. After the phone call, there's then a documentation review. So the system will randomly generate a list of documents that will back up about 25 to 40% of the points that you're earning on the assessment. And the standards team reviews those documents as well to make sure that they're appropriate for the points that you're earning. And that's for everybody, which is the phone and document. And then we do an on-site review of 10% of all B corporations every year, which is literally us coming out to your business and getting verification for the entire assessment. So there's the kind of a broad thing for everybody and the chance of a deep assessment. Most of the time when we do an on-site review, there is some kind of score change, mostly down but sometimes up when people haven't been giving themselves enough credit that we would go and find for them. The only way that you lose certification that you're not eligible for anymore is if we find that you've materially misrepresented your company. And so even if the score adjustment goes down below the 80, there's a cure period to get you back up. And so we're working with folks on that to provide verification, but you are basically kicked out if you're misrepresenting the company. So that goes through the performance and verification process, and then on the transparency piece, that impact report that shows people how you're doing in each of the individual areas for certified B corporations is available online at bcorporation.net. So this is Federal Books report. They're an awesome company up at a 122, and you can see how they're doing in every single subsection. That's kind of it on standards. Any other questions there? We can come back to it, of course. Yeah.
Well, I teach sustainable development here, and I'm interested in tourism and that sort of thing. And I find there just are a lot of certifications out there. It's really a mess. I don't mean you to show your hand if you have competition or not, but is this a problem that you guys face as well, or?
So there are a ton of certifications out there. Most of them are for a particular product or for a particular practice. So there's a LEED building, and there's organic food, and there's fair trade coffee, but there's very few other folks who are doing a corporate assessment and certification, mostly because Bank of America has the biggest LEED building in the world, but that doesn't tell you anything about what happens in that building. And one of the things that we feel actually is the movement is folks moving from looking at just the product and making decisions based on that to a scenario where people are looking at both the product and the company behind it. And there's been a ton of research, both by our own partners at BBMG, but also by Cohen and by JP Morgan and all of the very impressive names that verify that this is actually the movement, that consumers make choices based on what the company is doing, and they're looking at things beyond the product certification. Great, so the second piece of what certified B corporations do, so that's kind of like step one, is earn a verified minimum score of 80 points on that assessment. Step two is actually on that legal component where we actually ask companies to put into the legal charter of their company a commitment to considering not only their financial shareholders, but also their other stakeholders, such as their community, their employees, their environment, their suppliers, which is a way kind of moving from that short-term financial focus, which is typical of a standard structure, and moving it towards one that has a broader view of what the impact of the company is. I'm going to go a little bit more into that distinction when we talk about the benefit corporation policy work, but that is one of the requirements of certification, is that you are making a legal commitment to considering more than just the financial bottom line. who are these crazy companies that do all these things? So there's over 700 B corporations and now a global movement. Most of the B corporations right now are in the US, but we have a quarter of the community that's in around the world. We're starting a partnership with a sister organization in South America that's really starting to get some momentum going there. A lot of interest from Western Europe and also from Australia. Australia loves B Corporation. No one knows why. And there's brands that you'll recognize on here. This is always heavy on the consumer products area, just so folks can see some names they know. But there's also a pretty diverse community as far as including B2B companies, financial services, retailers, and also the consumer products folks. So this is again designed to be a way to recognize all different kinds of companies that are doing good with their business. Why do they do this? There's a lot of different reasons, and I'm going to go through this a little quickly, just so you can get a feel for this. There's all those things on the left-hand side are the real hard, like talking to the CFO or the COO about what they're doing. For many companies, this is about leading a movement. They have felt like they are soldiers fighting a good fight out by themselves and wherever they are, and fighting against a system that doesn't work for them. And this is a way to join forces with other companies that have that same force within them to really figure out how we change the system. And so for many companies, it does have to make business sense, but it's also more than that. This is about banding together and showing the world that there's a different way to do business. As far as kind of how companies are using this and the value they're getting out of this, again, we've seen this trend that consumers are looking at the company, not just the product, but that consumers don't trust anything the companies say about themselves. So this is a way for them to close that gap and be able to have a third party verify that they do what they say they do. So companies are using this as a way to communicate to consumers on packaging, on websites, on that's my favorite one, is the toothbrush holder. It's like tiny, but it's great because it's really getting into all the different products that people are using. We recently got a hacking box that had a certified B Corp logo on it, which was a fun first. So this is a way for companies to be just communicating to their consumers that they are again doing what they say they do. There is growing market awareness about the B Corporation community. It's a couple of quotes from folks on Care 2 or in the northern Beaufort County in South Carolina who chose a B Corporation to help with their city planning process because they found out they were a B Corporation. And so there's a starting to have a preference among consumers for B Corporations. Another piece that's really exciting for B Corporations is we're getting a lot of press. In many ways, the economic downturn has helped the B Corporation community because we can often provide the positive alternative to whatever negative story is happening at the time. And so we've got a ton of press hits. We're partnering with folks like Inc. for the 500, 5,000. There's a separate fastest growing B Corporations list. We partner with Bloomberg Business Week on their most promising entrepreneurs. And then we're also doing our own outreach. So we partner with Fast Company to highlight rock stars, the new economy, who are folks that are growing their impact as well as their revenue, and really showing that you can be traditionally successful as well as having a high impact on all of your stakeholders. We just yesterday launched our Best for the World lists that was announced through Bloomberg Business Week. Had immense coverage by Fast Company, The Guardian, Inc., Forbes, all over the place. This is another pro tip. Everyone loves lists. It's a thing. We can talk about all of these companies individually and how awesome they are until we're blue in the face and no one pays attention until we put it in list form. All of a sudden, everyone's like, oh yeah, top 10 list, that's great. So this is the overall list that we just published yesterday. We'll do the best for community and then best for environment, best for workers as separate lists throughout the year to get attention to folks who weren't in the overall component as well. One thing that we're doing is, again, partnering with folks who are getting the word out there. Ogden Publication runs Natural Home, Mother Earth News, a bunch of other publications for the conscious consumer they're donating ad space to us so that we can be communicating to these consumers about the community of certified B corporations. Again, going back to the legal component, for many, while the legal piece is a requirement for certification, it's also a benefit for many companies who want to be able to maintain that mission as they grow and scale. And we'll get a little bit more into that in benefit corporation, but this is really a way for companies to put that in so they can be in it for the long run. On the money end, we have a bunch of partnerships and discounts that are available for certified B corporations. We have partnerships with a couple of MBA schools at NYU Stern and Columbia that are actually offering the same loan forgiveness program to alums who work at B corporations as they do to alums who work at nonprofits. So that's a pretty big carrot for a lot of those students to be looking at B corporations and bringing those skills to high impact companies. And there's a couple of case studies here on Federal Books, who's saving a bunch of money on Salesforce credit card processing on their retail campaign. Guayaquil's using NetSuite, that's basically an ERP platform that manages everything from supply chain to customer relationship management and financials, and they're getting a significant discount on that, as well as a free peers rating, and we'll go into that in a second. So there's, we try really hard. Our goal is to support high-impact entrepreneurs, and so the more that we can save them money, that means that they can scale faster, they can be paying their employees better, they can be partnering with more suppliers. So we're really working on their behalf. And the last piece, again, this is part of the movement for folks, and so people like to get together and figure out how to make that work faster. We make a ton of connections among the B Corporation community. That's a couple of photos from the Champions Retreat last year, where we brought 300 folks from about 200 B Corporations together to meet each other, but also to figure out how do we accelerate this movement, what can we be doing together that we can't do alone. And people are really enjoying that. Again, there's many entrepreneurs who feel like they're out there by themselves. This is a way for us to get the community behind them. So that's the first piece on certified B corporations. I'm going to dive into the benefit corporation piece, but if there's any questions first. Great. So kind of doing the deep dive on legal, depending on who you are, this is either the most exciting part or the most boring part, so either way is fine. Again, one of the issues that we've seen is that either by law or by custom, businesses feel that they have to maximize profits. This is something that has come up in several cases over the years, starting with the Revlon case in Delaware in the 1980s. Recently reaffirmed in the eBay versus Craigslist case in 2010. That's a direct quote from the Chancery Court of Delaware, which is basically the highest corporate court in the country. For those of you who are confused about why I'm talking about Delaware so much, seeing as it's one of our smaller states, it is essentially the home of corporate law in the U.S. The majority of Fortune 500 companies are there, and there's a majority of publicly owned companies are there. And it's where a lot of companies move if they're looking for investment funds or something, because the Delaware Corporation is what many investors are used to. Much of the reason behind that is that Delaware has really sophisticated corporate courts, and that's where they make their money, and so they make sure that the resources of the courts are available to companies. So what Delaware does is really important. And this coming from Delaware really reaffirms the idea that under standard corporate law, you, at particular points, and especially at sale, you have to take the highest bid. And that's a big problem for companies who want to take into consideration more than just how much money they're going to get. So there's been times when people haven't brought on investors because they don't ever want to face that kind of decision. And there's been folks who have been forced into a particular sale because, Mary offered them $10 a share, and she's going to completely destroy all of their employee and supplier programs. But Dan offered them $9 a share, and he is super committed and wants to expand all of those and do more service. And if you have any outside investors and you choose that lower price, those investors will sue you for not maximizing their return, and they will win. And that's basically the issue that we're looking at. And that's not just, many folks feel that that's something that public companies have to deal with. It applies to all private companies because that's the corporate law of all companies in the US. And so if you're the only one, then that's fine, but if you had to bring in any outside capital and to grow the company, you can be at risk of losing the mission of the company when you grow old, at the very least, and if you were to move on, at any other point. So that's a big problem that a lot of companies face. So what we've done is we've worked with attorneys and businesses and other folks across the board to create a new version of the corporation called the benefit corporation. It's exactly the same as a regular corporation, so you can buy things, sell things, have employees, do everything exactly the same, except they have a different purpose and different levels of accountability and transparency. So the purpose of a benefit corporation is to actually create general public benefit, which is a material positive impact on society and the environment. They have the ability to name a specific public benefit they want to focus on. The directors and the officers must take into consideration those stakeholders when they're making a decision, which you'll note is a very big difference from not being allowed to take into consideration those folks. And they have to report on their impact using an independent, transparent, third-party standard, both to the shareholders and to the public, so that there's a little bit of public accountability and making sure that companies are performing. The exciting news is that we have 12 states who have enacted benefit corporation across the country, 16 more in queue. The big bold on here is like literally in an hour, the governor of Delaware is going to introduce a version of benefit corporation legislation there. It has already been hardwired by the bar, so we anticipate that it will pass. It's a little bit different than the model that we've created, but it's extraordinary in the degree that it's actually recognizing the problem and creating a different version for mission-driven companies. So there'll be another press release you can see at B Corp later on today, but we're really excited to be moving in Delaware, and also really to have such great bipartisan support. This is something that people don't usually argue against. It's a new kind of form that's opt-in, there's no regulations, and it's about businesses being able to run their company in the way they see fit and not how the government says they should run it. So that's pretty much a win-win-win for any party. A couple of quick clarifications on benefit corporation. So first of all, certified B corporation and benefit corporation are different. And again, we can tell the press that we're blue in the face that they're different. Oftentimes it gets reported that they're the same, and it's not true. So the certification is, again, you have to meet that verified 80 points through B-Lab. B-Lab is the only place that you can get certified as a B corporation. And it's a certification. It doesn't, there's that legal requirement, but it's not run through the state, it's not recognized by the state. It's a private certification, just like LEED or Fair Trade. The benefit corporation is a state-recognized structure in places where it's passed that amends the purpose, accountability, and transparency of your corporation. You can be a benefit corporation without ever talking to B-Lab. You can use somebody else's standard for your reporting. And you can be a certified B corporation and be any structure that you would like, and we'll go into that a little bit as well. So many times, especially with folks who are looking to start businesses or they know they're going to be working with a startup at some point, they say, well, then what's the right structure? Is it an LLC? Is it a corporation? Is it a this? Is it that? The really short answer is we don't care. The structure that you choose is going to depend on your needs for taxation, for protection, for liability purposes. That's something you're going to talk about with your accountant and your lawyer. What we say is, great, you decided to be an LLC because of XYZ reasons. If you're going to be an LLC, you should put language into your charter that says you're going to maintain your mission as you scale. And there's LLCs are great, they're very flexible because they're governed by contract law. We provide template language to put into that charter so that you don't have to make it up. And you go on your merry way as an LLC and you have your values baked into the charter. If, on the other hand, you decide to be a corporation for taxation or investment or whatever reasons that you talked about with your lawyer, not with me, because I'm not a lawyer, then you can either elect to become a benefit corporation if it's available in your state. In some other states, there's a little bit of wiggle room that enables you to put a commitment to your values into the charter even without benefit corporation, and we provide language for you to put into your charter for that. And then we basically recommend that you don't incorporate in a state that has neither of those and that you know that isn't happening in a while. So like Montana, we're not looking at benefit corporation for a while. It doesn't have a constituency state. I wouldn't recommend it. Wouldn't recommend it anyway. But and then the other options that people are looking at are still available as a certified B corporation. You can be a co-op, you can be an employee-owned company, you can be owned by a nonprofit. These are all options that are available to you. The requirement to be a certified B corporation is that you're a for-profit entity. And then there's different pieces of the puzzle that fit into the structure to make sure that you can maintain that mission in whatever structure you choose. But B-Lab is agnostic on what you're using, because that's going to depend on things that are completely unrelated to mission maintenance over time. Does that make sense? Because I just did a lot of like legally stuff, and that's, again, either really exciting or really boring.
Just real quick then, just for clarity. So B-Labs or B Corps are really just for-profit entities. There are no nonprofit entities that are being put through for B. They could be certified, but they couldn't be a B corporation. Is that right?
Nonprofits cannot be a certified B corporation. The reason for that is that nonprofits already have a legal designation. There's no problem that nonprofits run into if they want to consider non-financial stakeholders, because that's the only people that they're allowed to consider. And so it's like, great, you already have your thing. Like, that's awesome. All these for-profit companies that want to sell coffee and make a little bit of money, like they run into problems when they do that. And so our goal is, and that from a like long-term perspective, the nonprofit sector is really important for providing services in a ton of ways, but it's not the biggest impact on our overall economy. The for-profit business sector is. And so we're here to say, great, this is the biggest part of our economy. Right now it's doing some pretty terrible things to a lot of people and to the environment. We need to reverse that. So we need to make tools available and recognition and structure available for-profit companies to do good with their business. So we work with many nonprofits to get the word out, or they buy from B corporations, or if they're a financial institution, they might have all of their companies take the assessment, or there's a lot of things they can do, but we're not looking to basically to solve a problem that we don't think is as pressing as the for-profit problem. The last piece I'm just going to touch a little bit on, it's our newest initiative called Gears. Again, this is our goal is to create a better path for impact investing to reach in new levels, and for more high impact companies to be able to access capital. So the bigger story here is that impact investing has existed for a long time under the name socially responsible investing. But for 99% of the cases, socially responsible investing means that you're still in public mutual funds, you're still in kind of standard tools, and you're just getting rid of whatever sin stocks you're getting rid of. So it might be no weapons, it might be no alcohol, it might be no tobacco. That means you're still investing in McDonald's and Walmart and oil and the rest of them. So again, what we're looking at is how do we create better infrastructure for investors to be able to use their dollar to create an impact. So this is all in the private equity space, because that is mostly where the interest is in the impact investing community. And it's a way, we basically take that same B impact assessment, that same B impact report that you saw earlier, and create a version of it that's focused for investors. The idea here is that investors have a ton of tools to be able to make decisions based on financial performance of the companies they're looking at during due diligence, and they don't have any comparables or benchmarking or metrics to look at if they want to be making an impact with their money. And so this is taking again all of those tools that we use for the assessment for B corporations and making it into a way for investors to make decisions based on that. We have almost 400 geared rated companies. We have about 50 pioneer funds, and these are investors actually that are committing both to supporting the growth of the gears community as well as to start making a preference to invest in gears rated companies and funds. And that's really where we're headed, is for folks to have an investment preference for companies. First for folks who have gone through the assessment, and then later down the line for folks who are performing better. For many of this is kind of like the broader application where you have more of your quote mainstream companies that are going through it, and the idea is first you get them to measure it matters, then you create incentives around improving better in all of those areas. So the big vision here is redefining success in that for-profit world from not looking to be the best in the world, but actually the best for the world, so that we can really redefine what it means to be a business and what it means to have a capitalist economy and create an economy that supports us all. And that is it.
Wow. So while we're just, that was great. It's kind of
it's
fun.
a lot.
Every time I have you come in, it's just like, I'm just always scribbling notes here. Now, so what's happening in Delaware in the next hour? How does that continue to impact kind of the trending of the next 16 that's in the queue for becoming a certified?
So the bar has drafted legislation for Delaware, and this afternoon they will be introducing it to the legislation, and the governor is introducing it, so it's got like precedence, I think, because it's from the governor. It'll go to committee, and we actually expect it to be passed this summer. It has, again, because it's already been approved by the bar, and as far as corporate law is concerned, the Delaware legislatures follow what the bar recommends. It is slightly different from the model legislation for the, let me just go back up to, here we go. For the purpose area, instead of making, they basically use different language. So we specifically say that the purpose of the company is to create general public benefit. The Delaware language says that the company shall operate in a responsible and sustainable manner, which is just more focusing on the operations of the company as opposed to the overall goal of the company. And the English version of that is this is do good, and the Delaware version is kind of do no harm. So it's just a little bit less stringent there. On the accountability, they have it's actually really interesting, and I can go into more of this if you want. So we have this idea that you shall consider the effects of your decisions on all stakeholders. So on shall consider, one of the critiques of this is that you can consider something and then ignore it. Like, that's pretty easy to do. Yeah, considered by it. Please. What the Delaware legislation does is it says that the company shall balance the pecuniary interests of the company, the stakeholders that it material impacts, and then for Delaware companies, they have to name a specific public benefit, where that's just an option for benefit corporations. And the argument there is that we try and say that you don't have to have a specific thing that you're going for. It can be more about general impact. And the critique on that side is that, yes, companies want to do good, but they need some kind of directive. Some kind of framework for the directors to say, like, yes, we want to operate in a responsible and sustainable manner, but our ultimate objective is X, which is a specific goal to create more fair trade coffee or to create a living wage or whatever it is. So that's like a little bit less intense, but for this it's actually more intense because this is saying that we have to consider, and for Delaware you have to balance the financial interests of the company, the specific public benefit that you've named, and the interest of the state, the best interests of the stakeholders that you're material affecting. And best interest is again a really key term, because this is again just like considering the effect on those stakeholders, but in Delaware it's actually considering the best interests, which is a higher bar for consideration in like legalese. Things I thought I'd never know. And then on transparency, they do not require a third-party reporting, and they do not require public reporting. So it's company, they can use a third party, but they can also like create their own metrics, and they can report that to only shareholders. That's our biggest problem with it. The other pieces are a little, they're extraordinary in how far they've gone. We would have preferred that they had the same levels of transparency here. On the other hand, in the Delaware court's eyes, they're thinking about this much more under the idea of a public company. And for a public company, if you're reporting to your shareholders, it's essentially public information. So for those guys who are thinking about this in terms of, the Herman Millers and the interfaces and those folks, like if they elected this, it's not as much of a difference in their head. We deal mostly with private companies, and so in our head it's very different to have shareholder reporting versus public reporting. The introduction of Delaware is very helpful in that there's been, some people go back and forth on, well, it's not really a law that companies have to maximize profit, and that whole shareholder maximization thing is a myth, and it's only because of this precedent and that precedent, and it's kind of yes, and the Delaware Chancery Court has ruled in XYZ cases that have laid precedent that shareholder maximization is the rule. And so people still try and fight that, but the fact that the Delaware Chancery Court has said, yeah, well, if you want to consider other things, you have to do something different, kind of affirms the fact that you do really need something different, and that these folks who are kind of trying to argue the lack of legislative law as somehow not affecting the shareholder value idea, it kind of gives us a little bit more backing that this actually is a problem because the Delaware courts said so. Like, you don't have to believe me, you can believe the Chancery Court, they're the ones who's going to decide this case. So that's really helpful for us that, people have argued whether or not there's a problem, and we can very clearly say, no, there is a problem. The downside to it is folks will look to Delaware for the language more so than they'll look to BLAB, even though it's been around longer. And so the worry is that the newer legislation would get watered down to something like the Delaware transparency standards. So for instance, in Colorado, we had been going through a back and forth with the bar there about the purpose piece. They liked the Delaware purpose piece a lot better than ours, and we were kind of, okay, that's fine, but then they were going to adopt Delaware wholesale. And so then we had to negotiate to say, no, you can use the Delaware purpose piece, but let's step it up with transparency to matter more to the companies that are going to be using it in Colorado. So it's really great that it's really establishing the fact that this is needed legislation. And it's just because of the lower transparency standards, we don't want that to influence the new legislation that will go forward. And so that's something that we'll just have to balance.
I'll open it up for the class and then.
Do you find that, you mentioned there's a lot of material available for the companies that go through that assessment to be certified. Do you find that, I just lost my whole question, I'm so sorry. Do you find that a lot of those companies, are they moving towards, or is it because they're, I'm sorry, here's what it was. Okay, do you find that there's one main barrier, whether the state that they're incorporated in or whatever it may be, to them having a full benefit corporation status? Is it that there's like a lack of capacity, or their mission statement isn't truly
So for companies who've taken the assessment but they're not moving towards certification?
Or they're certified, or they're working to become certified?
Yep.
I guess my first question should be, is the bulk of those companies are they limited because they exist within a state that isn't yet receiving?
Right, so again, quick clarification, you can be a certified B corporation in any structure, in any state, in any country, anywhere. We recognize that it's silly for us to say, well, you can't be a certified B corporation if it's not a benefit corporation in your state yet, because that just started happening 2 years ago. So what we do for folks in, so if you're in a state like Montana that doesn't have a constituency statute or benefit corporation, is in the certification term sheet that you sign with us. It commits you to considering stakeholders to the extent that you can under current law, and it commits you to electing benefit corporation status once it's passed. And so there's a path to certification for any company. Mm-hmm. The bigger issue, which I think might be where you're looking at, is what's the biggest barrier for certification or for companies, and it is the legal. If we didn't have the legal requirement, we would have 1,000 more B corporations tomorrow, that are meeting the bar, that can have a verified score. The legal's big, and it's new and it's scary, and attorneys haven't heard about it, and a lot of entrepreneurs trust their attorney, and attorneys hate everything that is new. And it's a real change. That document defines what the duties of the directors and the officers are. And now you have, even if you've been operating that way, that's a real commitment to saying that every board meeting we're going to talk about this, and we're going to take notes about it, and we're going to do a little bit more research, and yeah, I'm accountable to this. And there's no financial, you can't sue somebody for not being green enough and for $5 million. That doesn't exist. But you someone can bring a suit to say you went down this path of moving your suppliers, and it was terrible, and you had this kind of impact on that community or on those factories, and it's clear that you didn't consider that, and you can now be a suit to provide what's called injunctive relief that might make you reverse that decision, or clean up your act in the new supply chain, or do something. So there is. It's a real commitment for folks, and so for many companies, that's they go through the assessment in a day and a half, and then it's a year-long conversation with their board and their attorneys about the legal commitment before they're signing a term sheet with us. Right. So it's on the one hand, it's kind of common sense that many companies operate in that way anyway, but on the other hand, it's a really big change to move the charter of your company that way.
Right. So, and one thing you brought up with your answer is perhaps maybe the legal environment in the future, as there possibly be cases arise. There's no really precedent for really evaluating a certain.
Exactly. So just as in 1900, nobody really knew what was going to happen for a lot of things, and a kind of precedent was created, and there was CLEs about everything and whatever. We anticipate the same thing will happen about benefit corporation, right? There's going to be a case. Hopefully, we'll probably plant it. Fun fact: most of the famous cases that you've heard of have been planted. Seriously, but you want to have something that this is the bar for consideration. This is the bar for balancing. This is what the standard is, and this is the CLE program, and this is the curriculum in the law school, and this is whatever. And none of that exists right now, right? This is all new, and so and the only people that people can call is B Lab and Drinker Biddle, and a list of 200 attorneys, but that's only a list of 200 attorneys who've interacted with this, and that's not enough now. So we're in the real beginning stages of creating a new kind of niche within the legal community, which is where we really are focusing a lot of time on how are we educating lawyers, how are we making sure that they're communicating this to their clients appropriately, how are what's the case going to be that we plan to figure out what that bar is. What state is that going to happen in, so that we can create more assurance for people, because it's a new structure, and there's not, I can't tell you well, what'll happen if I make this kind of decision?
Right. Yeah.
We'll see.
So, when you're talking about doing good, especially beyond doing harm, I guess especially if you're looking at gears or I'm investing, how am I comparing those? Are there quantifiable metrics in place, or is it all just how well they do at this, or how many of these things they've accomplished, like in terms of?
So as far as certification, the assessment is all quantitative. Like all of those metrics that we were looking at on the assessment, it's, you know, what's your supply chain? Is there a preference? What percentage of your supply chain is fair trade or small businesses or et cetera, et cetera? How much do you give? What is your community service program? Those are all quantitative metrics. There's a partial subjective piece to it in the impact focused business models area, where if you're doing something that is directly providing benefit to a particular stakeholder, we are giving you some amount of points for that. And that's, you can either get direct or indirect. So for example, in the environment, if you're installing solar panels, you get 100% because clearly a direct impact on the environment. If you're going organic food, that's generally an indirect impact because you are reducing the chemical usage, but the product is actually food, and so there's a little bit of a gradation among that. As far as the legal structure goes, the metrics there for benefit corporation is that you do have to create a material positive impact, and that has to be measured against a third-party, independent, transparent standard. And so there is the question of like, well, there's going to be good standards and bad standards, and a company can choose which standard to have, but it does have to be a quantifiable metric for that, that a benefit corporation has to report on. For the Delaware version of that, just because of the way the impact of that kind of, you know, do good versus do no harm is more around the accountability piece than it is about the reporting piece, because they still have to report on their overall impact as well as on their specific public benefit. The difference there again is that they can create their own rubric that they then report on, which is very similar to what folks already do with their own sustainability reports, which some of them are really good and are very transparent and very honest. And some of them cherry pick like crazy and only report on the ones that they're doing well in. So and that's one of the reasons why we don't like the Delaware transparency requirements as much, because it gives the company a little bit of space to hide if they wanted to. But for all of those, it does have to be a quantitative assessment of your impact.
So am I comparing, or am I quantifying how much money they're investing into this, or is there, like, for these different impact assessments, are you quantifying the impact or the investment?
Great question. So we only assess impact, and that's like a bigger conversation that happens in the sustainable business space, and especially in impact investing space. We are far on this end of the spectrum that you measure financial performance and you measure impact performance, and then an investor can decide how much they want to weight each one, right? So there's investors who don't care about return, they just want to make a difference with their money. There's investors who want, you know, a decent return, and so they'll get as much impact as they can get for that. And then there's folks who want, you know, the over-the-top returns, and so they're going to consider that, but, you know, at the end of the day, they're going to take the higher financial reward. And our goal is to provide that measurement, right? Because like all the investors have the ability to do all the due diligence on the financial side because they know what metrics to look at, and they know what their formula is for that, and they don't have that right now for impact. And so that's our goal, is to provide that kind of side by side. You can use both of these now instead of only looking at financials and maybe a couple stories that, you know, the impact companies were telling you about what your money was doing. On the other side of the spectrum are folks who look at what's called social return on investment, which is the idea that you can. It's kind of the idea that, you know, this dollar that you're investing, like it had an impact on the environment in this way, that you could calculate that now, like, your return is $1.10, and so like the real return for that is, you know, 10% or whatever. That's something that a lot of folks have put a lot of really good thought into, and there's a bunch of work that's out there. We don't like doing that. We feel that, honestly, for a very specific reason, that we find it incredibly difficult and a total rabbit hole to try and assign value to solar panels, or to paying a living wage, or to having fair trade suppliers and trying to say, well, that's worth an X amount return, that feels off to us. And there's other, intelligent people disagree, and there's other people who think that that's a way to get the money people to think about it in a different way, which is a different approach. But we are. We don't measure financials. We report on that on the investor-facing piece because they're like for different funds invest in different size and whatever kinds of companies, and so they need to know basics. But we don't give them any additional tools on the financial impact. We just provide investment on that. And importantly, we do what the gears rating does is it also creates a fund rating. So for if you're investor X, and you've invested in 3 companies, one of which has a really high impact, and the other 2 have pretty okay. We do a roll-up for that, so that and it's weighted on how much money you've invested in each of those funds. And so if you only put a little bit of money in that company with the really high impact, it's not going to be weighted as heavily for the fund impact rating, and so that. Will give the institutional investors better information, because those institutional folks are usually investing in funds and not in companies, and so that's how we weight the rating for the fund level within the gears process.
How is that rating determined? To just how well they live up to metrics?
Well, it's the companies. Like, so if it's a 4-star company and then 2 2-star companies,
Okay.
It's a roll up of those, and then we also ask questions of the fund manager itself about how it tracks its own performance, and then there's a weighted rating that comes out of that for the fund.
So the impact specifically then is how many kilowatt hours am I getting out of solar panels, or how many?
So the impact rating is again that same impact report, right? Like this is what you get, and so their rating is a 81. And so when you calculate the fund rating, it's it's 81 times however much money it was that you put into that times the 122 that Federal Books got that you invested in times the third company, and then you divide that out and you have a weighted rating.
So is that number 81 available to anyone to see once you're certified?
Once you're certified, yep. So if you're just using the assessment as a tool, it's confidential,
Right.
But the transparency standard for certified B corporations is that this entire thing is available on bcorporation.net.
So is that enough incentive for people to see continual improvement? Or once they're certified, they kind of just lay off?
So, no, actually, it usually has the reverse effect, because even for companies who already do a ton, most entrepreneurs are like type A people, and so if you give them not an A+ on their test, they're going to start working with that A+, they get very upset. And so it's more from this gives them a quantitative metric to work at, whereas if you're just operating your company in a really positive way, there's no goal that you can see the improvement for. And I think it's really internal motivation for most folks. It's not, everyone's going to be upset with me if I have an 82 and then next year I have an 81. There's not that many people following it that closely right now. So it's not going to be a big factor for them. And there's other things that we do, for the Best of the World list, we are recognized in the top 10%. So that's additional media buzz for folks in that top tier, so that can be motivating. But it's usually about the internal company. This has been enough to scare away some people who say, my consumers think I'm awesome, and you're going to tell me that I have to tell them I'm not doing well in this area? I'm not sure how I feel about that. So we've, most of the time that we can kind of get folks comfortable with that, because we do want to value the transparency piece, and people get that after a while. But for folks who already have a pretty good loyal customer base based on mission, it can be scary to air the dirty laundry.
So what's the highest score then?
The highest score, I think somebody has a 162 right now out of 200. Yep. It's the scale seems off, but you have to remember that in order to be what we consider the highest impact companies in the world, you have to have an 80. So that's a 40%, but it's really difficult to get a 40%. We measure a lot of things, and it's really difficult to be doing everything at the same time. That's actually, like, once you register, there's a little, like, quick tips guide that takes you through, like, what to think about when you're taking the assessment. And what I tell people all the time is, don't be sad when you say no. We expect you to say no for more than half of the questions, even if you're going to be certified. Again, they're type A entrepreneurs though, so they're like, no, listen, yes to everything.
Is it expensive to, for a lot of companies? I mean, are there policies? Obviously, you have to establish written policies, and you put a lot of effort into that.
So it depends on the company. Again, for right now, we're mostly recognizing what companies are already doing. Right, like the vast majority of the certified B corporations were passing when they first took it, and so there wasn't any additional expense that went into improving it. There are companies who were, at 60 or 70 and said, that sucks, I want to be part of this, like what do I have to do? And so for those folks, it's going to depend on what they're looking at. So, writing a policy doesn't cost any money, but putting in some energy efficiency improvements might have an upfront cost. Creating a community service thing might have a little bit of lost time. There's some things that will have more financial impact than others, but it's not like a, and that depends on what the company wants to focus on, because there are things that you can do that aren't going to have a big direct hit on your bottom line, but there are other, sometimes more impactful things that do.
Sorry, so could you also get certified then, like there's a breakdown that's provided there, but could you treat your employees terribly and do really well on everything else, and even though that's visible, you can still get certified?
Yeah, you can. It's very rare, and it's very difficult. One of the things that is pretty deliberate is that you can't only do one thing. There's no one area that can get you enough points to certify, so you have to be more of a holistic approach to your business. That said, it's technically possible to not have any points in the workers area and still get 80. And this might be a reason that companies wouldn't choose to be certified in that case, because it'll say 0. And that's not going to look very good. But it is technically possible, but I don't think I've ever seen a company get a 0 in a whole area. That would be really sad. We might have to not certify them anyway.
On principle.
On principle. We have that clause. We're allowed to refuse anybody discuss. Just rewrote that clause. Yes?
Just in your personal opinion, with the shifting of consumers' purchase behavior and just how people are starting to become more conscious and favor this sort of like public display, do you think there's enough market drive for that to sort of push more states to legally try to change their structures to allow this sort of
So importantly, the only reason that we ever get anything done in a state is because there's business and consumer support, right? B-Lab can't march up to the legislature and be like, we have this great idea for corporations. Could you please pass the law? They'll kick us out the door. We started certifying companies way before we were looking at legislation. And the way that we get to legislation is business support. I hate to say it, but it's true. Legislators listen to businesses in their districts more than they listen to regular people, and legal support. But it's also important. We have there's been a petition on CARE 2 for a while. We have over 100,000 signatures from citizens across the country that we list, and it's very important to have those. And we've had people go lobby their legislators and talk to them about it. I think the main reason it'll be easier to get things passed is that you just have more businesses, and the more people who are supporting those businesses, the more votes you have. So it's more like a funnel up.
Right. Okay.
As the industry is growing, so this is kind of a social entrepreneurship class, and we're kind of, we've had, Judy Wicks come through, and the guys from Stewart Markets, and just kind of seeing a real change going on. And you are, building a better version of the economy. Can you predict? Can you like look out there and see that this is something of a sea change that's happening, that maybe 10 years ago, this wasn't on anybody's radar, 5 years ago, and this kind of maybe...
I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think that this is really building momentum, and I think that looking at things, like to me, one of the reasons that I was drawn to B-Lab was around the legal component, because even if you had all these really great companies doing all these really great things, if you're not changing the rules of the game, you're still in the same game. And the effects of this game have not been good. So like our goal is to change the rules of the game. And you know, the Delaware introducing benefit corporation legislation is, you know, step one on a 1,000-step journey to get it so that all public companies have to be benefit corporations, right? And think about that's my goal, right? Like, you know, you need to have all of these companies and the certification and the community and the awareness and the consumer movement to get to a point where instead of all of those Fortune 500 CEOs being pressured into having the best return in 2.5 months, it's what happens to the world when that CEO is being pressured to balance the financial interests of their shareholders and the best interests of the stakeholders they materially impact, which for a Fortune 500 company is a lot of people. So that's the change that we're going for, and so I think it's honestly that Delaware introducing benefit corporation legislation is like one of the best steps that you could see, and Delaware was not talking about this 10 years ago. This was not on the radar. This was not, you know, what Delaware cared about, and the fact that Delaware is paying attention to this, and that people are really, and that the governor is introducing it, and that the bar, that actually the bar wrote the legislation, is a really key indicator that things are moving, because this just wasn't happening a decade ago.
Are you able to incorporate as a B Corp in Pennsylvania?
Yes, benefit corporation passed in the fall, and we had our first effective day on January 22nd. So there are now 20 benefit corporations in Pennsylvania. And we, there's a couple more, Dansko and Vertex, which are two actually local companies, are in a longer process to do that, but those will be big folks to have on the list since we're ready. Mugshots Coffee Houses, Revision Architecture, Roof Meadow, Nolan Painting, which is actually one of our larger residential painters around here. There's Solutions for Progress, Home Care Associates. There's a lot of really cool companies around here.
Any interest yet? Because any interest in the corporate sector in terms of like the big for-profit folks coming to B-Lab, I mean B corporations, like SAP or some of those kinds of guys? Are you guys even like you don't even get one? If you get one, all will follow.
So the issue with public companies right now is that right now we're under the regular rules of the game, and so for a current public company to be able to have a shareholder vote, to get a 2/3 shareholder vote to elect benefit corporation, is highly unlikely. Because that, like at the moment, like that cat is out of the bag. Those folks are not going to be voting for that because all of those people are kind of standard investor folks who aren't going to look for a benefit corporation. What we are doing right now with public companies is things like exploring supply chain partnerships, or procurement preferences, having suppliers take the assessment, because the legal component for certification is really difficult for them. What we think will happen first, and what will again kind of be the next big step, right? Like Delaware is like step one. The next big step is you have somebody become a benefit corporation and then go public, and then succeed. Because that's going to create the idea. That's going to set a precedent that you can have a publicly traded company that is considering other things that is still succeeding, you know, in the standard sense. And so that's going to be the next thing. And so then you'll have somebody that buys one of those things, and then you'll have, you know, like the first steps of each of those, and then eventually either through regulatory means where we're getting people to require this kind of thing, or through market pressure, we'll be able to have, you know, the day that we can have a shareholder vote for a public company to become a benefit corporation will be a good day. But it's not
Anything
soon.
We should keep dreaming.
So under the structure of a B Corp,
Yeah.
would there ever be a point when that we need to make a profit and we need to look out for the social good,
Uh-huh.
where that can't happen, or like to the degree that maybe an investor would want? So in other words, could you have investors wanting to sue for social good at the same time investors wanting to sue for profit, or not making enough profit, and then could managers get caught in between a rock and a hard place?
Yes, the legislation, especially the Delaware one is interesting. The way the benefit corporation legislation is worded is that you do have to, you have to consider the impacts of your decisions on your stakeholders, and then you have to be creating a general public benefit. So there will be, there's going to be times that people make decisions all the time of, well, this is cheaper, but this is more impactful, and the change here is that you're actually required to formally go through that for the bigger decisions. But as far as the benefit corporation piece goes, as long as you can show that you've considered it and you've gone through that process, then you're not liable for anything. And similarly, you're protected from the financial folks side to say that you're actually required to do so. So it takes a little bit of that pressure off. That said, you can certainly imagine a circumstance where nobody's happy. But the idea here is that it's not forcing a particular decision onto the board, it's giving the board more flexibility in what it can decide. And to be really honest, like, there's not a ton of cases, especially in the private company sphere, where investors are doing that kind of suit. Like, the precedent that has been set, sets in motion this whole like series where, like, there's this precedent, and so the attorney in the room at the board meeting makes this recommendation as to what should be done because it'll maximize this kind of thing for the shareholder. And so, like, what we're trying to do is like change that series that is kind of put in place by precedent and law that exists. Because it's not, there will be cases, but it's not, it's not going to wait for case law to figure this out. What we want to say is, like, before the attorney was saying, that the counsel was saying, like, no, you need to like sell this person because they're having the highest offer, and I don't care what that other offer is, like, it doesn't matter. And now the general counsel for that benefit corporation is like, great, we can make some money on that. Did you guys look at this other offer? Because we need to make sure that we've considered the impact of this one versus that one. And that just changes the conversation, and that changes the decision-making process. Honestly, the Delaware one is stronger for as far as what the conversation has to be, as far as balancing versus considering. And so it'll be interesting to see what that plays out as.
Is Delaware more landmark than California or Pennsylvania because it's a hub of business? Is that why?
Yeah. So I've heard, like, there's been a whole like slew of precedent in Delaware. Like, Delaware is the seat of corporate law. Like, the majority of Fortune 500, majority of publicly traded companies, just the majority of folks that engage in discussions like this are in Delaware. And so it's been, that's the elephant in the room. Like, people, literally, I would be giving this presentation, and I would list like all these states that we've passed or that have been introduced in, and be like, Delaware, is something happening? California passed it? It's a really big state. It's really big. No, but Delaware is basically the seat of corporate law in the U.S. And so that's why it's so important. A, they've introduced it, and B, it's just really interesting how, like, because the balancing, even though it's fewer stakeholders and it's more of a do no harm approach, the accountability piece is higher, that balancing those stakeholders versus considering those decisions. But to be fair, they probably know what they're doing as far as writing corporate rules and laws. And so there's probably already an idea in place of like what that bar would be and how the process would be going.
Any other questions?
So in global financial management, the principle we teach there is you've got to maximize, you've got to increase value from your decisions. And so there's these neat formulas that you figure out the net present value to determine if it's a wise investment or not. So on the social side, are there tools that managers then can use to say, here's the social impact of this decision, and to come to some sort of a bottom line that you can then weigh against the economic value that's being added there?
I don't think so yet. Because ours is more, like, so clearly ours is the assessment I'm most familiar with, and ours is more about overall impact, and it's not about, I mean, what, you know, the dumb version is that it's like, well, see how the assessment would change based on that decision, and then we can find a rating, and that's probably not what you're looking for. But I'd imagine that someone could take either the assessment or other things that are out there like GRI and apply this kind of thinking to that decision tree, so that you have a tool that's looking at the impact of it, of a decision as opposed to the impact of a company or a fund.
It seems like in order to operationalize this on a per decision basis, you've got to have some sort of a tool that lets you then you can make as a manager, you can weigh off, well, here's the economic return of this particular investment, here's the social return of this investment. Well,
if you could
return,
make
but
that,
here's the social impact of that.
Yeah, if you can make that and then, or tell me about it. No, I think you're right. It's needed. It's just not something that we've done yet.
I'm curious though, because in terms of what you, I put a little note here, get a look at this. So measure financial performance and measure impact performance, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out of Stanford with the social return on investment. Any of those, have you guys kind of peeked at any of those to see if you could conceivably translate the social return on investment to maybe measure impact as opposed to measuring financial performance?
So we have a philosophical disagreement with social return on investment. So it is entirely possible that someone could take our assessment and map it to whatever work is being done at Stanford and like assign value to that. We don't assign monetary value to impact because we feel it's a categorically different kind of return. And so it doesn't make sense to us to try and equate the two. Because, you know, it's apples and oranges, right? Like, why would you try and tell me what the financial impact of, you know, paying a living wage or using a solar panel is? Like, that's a categorically different kind of impact. And we do want people to make decisions based on that kind of impact, and that's the tool that we're providing. But, and you know, and I'd like to be honest, like if someone wants to use a social return on investment framework, that might be a way to get more people thinking about it in lots of different ways, but it's not going to be something that's in our assessment. And we report like on a Gears report, it has your assessment and your B impact report, and it has your financials, but it doesn't say like you know rating per million of capital raised or of income or whatever. Like those are just very categorically different pieces to us. And again, as I said before, intelligent people disagree, and there's other folks who think of it in a very different way. And if it gets us to a better place, then like awesome. Yeah. The more the merrier.
Well, just to kind of follow up on that, do you think though, not assigning monetary value though, especially when you're looking at like investors, that is more attractive to people that are going to be looking at investing, if they're able to, does that make sense? Like, do you think that in some ways that piece of getting kind of that impact investor is more using a monetary value, or do you think that that's changing as well?
See, to me personally, that if you're calculating the monetary value of impact, you're no longer making an investment based on impact. you're not changing the way that you think about your investment. It's someone else assigned a value to that and created, but you're not changing the way it's like, oh, well, that's the return, and you know, the person who I'm investing for is going to get it in a different way, but like it's not being challenged. The idea that you're only looking at financial value of an action is not challenged when you're looking at social return on impact as far as like equating value, financials to social environmental impact. If they're separate, you have to intentionally and deliberately make a decision based on the relative value of the financial and the social and environmental impact that you're having. And you have to deliberately and consciously make decisions in a very different way than if you're just being presented with dollar signs. Even if you know that the dollar signs really represent something else, they're still dollar signs. And so our goal is really to encourage people to be making decisions in a very different way than around financial value.
So on kind of following up on that, so when you say we measure what matters, and again, you can attract boards of investors if we could all put a dollar amount on impact performance, would say, hey, you know, for your financial return of 5%, you affect 50 million people here doing this, they'd all jump to the table, right? We'd solve the problem. So I'm curious though, so if we're not using monetary measures, and you know, boards are raising a great point here in terms of value, what are some of the other ways to get to value if it's not monetary? What, like, and has the B Lab folks, have you guys kind of started to develop a system platform to drive the market to say, look at some of these other non-monetary forms of creating value?
So I'm confused as to how that would be different from Gears. Like the Gears platform is, I'm an investor, I log in, and it's just like a Morningstar or Capital IQ, like, and I see a list of companies I've been rated with an overall star and a community star, an environment star rating, and like all of these metrics that I can then make decisions on. And you can run the comparables and the benchmarking, and you know, as we develop, it'll be over time, and it'll be across industry and geography, and like all the things that like investors usually do and they're used to with, you know, the Morningstar type portal. But it's only about social and environmental impact. So I'm just not sure.
So okay, so then let me clarify then, that's great. So then you would say, well look, actually the B Corporation, we can't quantify it monetarily, but we have measured this impact. We actually have a product that fully measures this impact in non-monetary, and this is our product. This is what we do.
Points and stars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, which is based off of the Morningstar bids. It's points and stars. You can invest in a 3-star environment company, you can invest in a 2-star overall company, you can invest in whatever, and that's what we hope people are going to be making decisions on. I mean, and there's, you know, and clearly they're not going to just invest in a vacuum, they're going to look at financials. But again, it goes back to our decision on, you know, you can make more informed decisions. You can say, I want this return and this impact, and find the companies that meet those requirements. But that's what investors do now. The investors, they go out and they say like, well, I run this type of fund and it's got this type of company in it at this size and I want this kind of return, and so I'm going to look for companies that fit that profile. The only difference that we're doing is it's the same thing. It's just that now there's like one more, you know, idea. It's like this size, this geography, this industry, and this kind of impact. And we're just providing the information to them about another criteria that they're looking at when they're making investment decisions. And hopefully it'll be an important one. And for different investors, it has different weights.
So the stars indicate, is it internal controls? I mean, if I'm investing, if I see a 4-star environment company, what is that telling me about that company in terms of impact, in terms of what it's doing?
So basically the overall scores convert to stars. So
and the scores
like an egg is sorry, I don't do Gears as much. So it's 80, so a 3. So 80 is a 3-star. So it's like between 0 and 40, you're just rated, and then 40 to 60 is 1 star. 60 to 80 is 2 stars, 80 to 100. That's because that's like usually how a lot of the investor metrics are based off of. Is a range, and then you get a star. And so if you have a 3 stars in the environment, it means you've gotten at least, you know, I guess calculating that, at least, you know, 60% of the available points in that area. And so it honestly doesn't tell you like what specifically they do. You'd have to drill down to their assessment and look at how they answer the questions. You just know that they're outperforming, right, X other percent of the companies that you're looking at. Just like in the S&P, if you're looking at a 5-star company, they're outperforming on a financial basis, you know, the other 80% of the folks that they're looking at. So it's the same type of benchmarking and comparability, but on these kinds of metrics, not on financial metrics.
Okay, so then we're left to just take, like, I guess there's not a rubric showing that, even if it's just carbon.
So you can, like, so subscribers to the Gears platform can drill down and look at companies' assessments if the companies make it available. And most of them do, because they want those investors to be making decisions based on that. The assessments aren't visible to your standard consumer because then we would never have anybody take the assessment. But if, you know, people who are looking for investment capital, they want those folks to do that, and if they want the investor to invest in them based on how well they're doing in the environment, they're going to make that transparent. And so that, you know, someone who's got, just like folks who, you know, subscribe to the Morningstar portal have additional access to financial information and stuff that's like not available to me. Folks who subscribe to the Gears portal as investors will have access to look at companies' assessments, if those companies make it transparent, to more information about the financials, to more everything, because the whole goal is to be a portal where investors find high-end companies to invest in. Like that's all this other stuff is like how you get there. It's about providing metrics that investors can make decisions on.
So is it theoretically sensitive enough? Well, if a manager's making a pretty big decision and they can see this is what it'll have on my bottom line and this is what it'll have on my star rating or my B Corp rating, and they can in a sense project or get projections on what each of these.
So that's the tool that I think you were asking about, and we don't have that kind of
not if there's a tool, but is it clear enough in the rubric to know, or in the questioning to know that, yeah, this comes up.
Sure, like if you wanted to say, you know, let's take something easy. So, you know, let's, if you want to say organic food, I'm a food company. There's 15 points available for making organic food. And that's a sliding scale. If you don't sell any organic food, you get 0 points. But if all of your food is organic, you get 15 points. And so that's like a really easy example. It's like if half of my food is organic, then I get 7.5 points. If I increase that, then I get the next point. And maybe that'll have a negative impact on my bottom line because I have to train the farmers and like maybe it's more intensive on whatever, like da 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 da. And then if I decide to decrease the amount of organic food that I make and I save money, then I decrease a point. And so that's a really, like, organic foods are really, and like the product ones where there's a very direct line are easy to do, but that's true of any question. Like you can look at it like this, all the weightings are transparent. You can say, great, like the healthcare benefits question is worth 3 points. And I get full credit if I'm doing, you know, over 90%, and then half credit if I'm doing 70 to 90, and this is not actually, not making this up. And, you know, like da-da-da. And so you can make decisions like, yeah, if I lower or, you know, the amount of coverage that I give my employees for healthcare, it's going to knock down my assessment 1.5 points or 3 points if I get rid of it. And if I care about my score, if I care about if I'm a certified B Corporation and it's public, I know it's going to go down. That's something I can consider. Not every decision will be that clear cut, because not every decision will have like a specific question on the assessment based on it. But it is like that's the platform we're going for. Absolutely.
How do you assign value then to each one of those things? How do you know that, you know, organic food is worth more than employee benefits? And do people disagree with your?
Oh, people disagree all the time. So first and foremost, like two really big things. Everything is always transparent everywhere. You can go in. This is public. I'm not in a you know, gated off portal. This is the regular portal. You can go see, like, because we're in a large company assessment, you can click on each of these ones to see how the weights change for smaller companies versus bigger companies, for service, manufacturing, wholesale. This gives you the points in each section, and then if you drill down into each of those sections, it'll tell you whether a question is heavily, equally, or lightly weighted within that section. So you can always figure it out if you do a improvement tool like that Excel spreadsheet, where it tells you like what you're doing and how you can improve. It'll tell you like you will get 2.6 points if you do this. And so that, A, everything is always transparent. That's like a really core value for us. B, we change. This is version 3 of the assessment, and it's changed significantly since the first alpha version in 2006, based on user feedback and the information from our standards councils and from the certified B corporations who are telling us that we're not asking you right, or that we should be asking something else instead. So it evolves over time, and it's going to, version 4 will launch next year, and as head of standards will tell you, the only thing that we know about the assessment at any given time is that it's wrong. So like, you know, this is the best we got, but we're always hoping to improve. And third, the weightings is like the biggest fight in the standards council meetings. You know, you go through everything else about, let's change this question that way, and let's, you know, make this a little, you know, more specific over here, and make better answer buckets, and that's all easy. And then it gets to the weightings questions, and people are throwing things at each other, and there's like knock down, drag out fights, and and this is what we got so far.
At least there's a disagreement.
Yeah, and that's great. You know, it would suck if, you know, we had just gotten like all the same 9 people in the room, and they were like, oh yeah, environment 50 points, and community 25 points. Like, that would be wonderful. So that's. So this is what this, and the standards councils are independent, so it's not just B-Lab being out there like making all the rules up. We have independent, thoughtful, expert leaders who are helping us. And if you think it's wrong, please tell us, and we'll bring it to them, and they'll fight about it again. but you can always see what it is.
I know you guys are a nonprofit, but have you taken the assessment yourself?
We have. You can even see it on our site. That's actually like the funniest part of our year, because, you know, there's like 6 people on the standards team that are like analyzing every question. And then they'll get in fights with each other, and they'll be like, well, the New York office does that. And they're like, but the New York office is only 35% of the overall footprint of B-Lab. And they're like, oh my goodness. So it's taken a minute, but it is, if you go to B Corporation and the nonprofit behind B-Lab, you can see the assessment. And then you can see all of our answers, so it's all up there. And we clearly don't get any points on employee ownership, but that's the only piece that, that we do 0 at, I think.
What's your overall score?
I'm trying to think.
Are you above 80?
We do pass. We do pass. That was like a big thing. I think we're like at a 102 or something, which is around median for the B corporations. And again, so and this is, everything's transparent all the time. You can see the members of the Standard Advisory Councils, the members of the board, the members of the Gears Councils. That is all in here, so let's look at our year report, and I'm really hoping that it's over. The 113, oh, someone's got
.9.
That's because I wasn't there last time. Yeah, so that's our report, and you can see the whole assessment. Oh, and we even have a list of our significant suppliers, so who we're buying from. And that's actually, a lot of the questions on the assessment depend on like who your significant suppliers are. We don't ask about, you know, the person you bought a pen from one time. We ask about, you know, your biggest guys.
So, as you see this, I mean, perhaps getting bigger, perhaps more public companies, if this was a fixture in that a lot of companies then had to follow because of the societal pressure, consumer pressure, or whatever, how does that change how you go about evaluating these ratings? Is this a system that can scale with that I mean, if a corporation has a lot of money on the line, if they see a tick in one of their ratings.
Yep, so right now, the assessment is best for companies with like fewer than 5,000 employees. We have a working group right now that is working on a new version, of the assessment for the larger companies in the like 5 to 25,000 range, I think. There are companies, especially in the gears world, who have gotten very upset with us when they didn't have a high enough score that they felt they wanted to brag about to their investors. The way that we maintain that, again, is always being independent and always being transparent. So it's an interesting idea as to whether or not, you'd have a lot of money riding in the line if there was like a small tick in your performance on the one hand. That'd be great. On the other hand, I don't know if having that short-term view is helpful for anything. So I don't know if that would really be something to be worried too much about. There are folks who have said that, they've noticed that they're in a 3-star rating, but they're only 3 points away from a 4-star rating, and so then they really start arguing about all of the answers and everything. And then, then we tell them that they're still at that rating, and then they have sometimes really tried to improve so that next year they get that 4th star. So that's already starting to happen a little bit. That's another one of the reasons, especially for gears, that we use stars instead of just numbers, because we don't want, this is a really great tool, and it's still new, and it's rough, like, honestly, in my opinion, there's not a big difference between a score, somebody scores an 85 and somebody scores an 87, right? So they both get 3 stars, and so then we draw lines, based on distribution, and make it kind of like roughly make sense so that you're putting people into percentiles and quartiles and that kind of thing. So we've already tried to like make sure that we're not having too much hinge on 85 versus 86, and so I think we should probably keep that at the forefront as we develop more of the investor-facing tools.
Do you see this as something you'd like to see the government doing instead, or like a government panel or committee, or would you rather be in the private side?
That comes up sometimes, and there's varying opinions. The majority opinion is that you don't necessarily want the government to be doing this, and that you might want government oversight, much like in the financial markets. As much as some parts of the financial markets really tick me off, they can be really great examples, right? So the government doesn't run a Morningstar rating, but and it's done a fairly terrible job at regulating those folks who are doing the ratings, but it could, in theory, like actually be very strict about making sure that those are operating in a real and truthful and accurate way. And so that might be one way to go about this, that there's B-Lab that does this kind of rating, and then there's maybe there's another competition that comes out that does a different one, and people can make decisions based on both of those, and then there's some kind of audit from, if we get so mighty and powerful that the government feels the need to regulate our processes, like, that might be one way to structure that. But much like in the financial markets, you don't necessarily want the government giving you your credit rating. That seems pretty odd. And we really embrace the value and the power of the market to create pressure and to create those other venues. And we'll certainly have competition, and if they do it better, great. And we'll have a lot of different ways of measuring impact, and people can make decisions based on it.
Great. Oh, Heather, we really did. Tell you your time.